Hello, GRCSU, and welcome to another Wednesday of Coffee with Coaches. And today we are going to be talking about proficiency-based grading. Woohoo! There's been so many different questions out there that we kind of thought that this would be a great opportunity, just maybe sort of walk through some of it and hopefully answer some of your questions that you have. So, Corey.
All right, let's pull up what we've got. And so I guess first what we're going to say is that we've been working with some of the southern schools on switching to jump rope. And, you know, it's one thing to learn a system, but in order to utilize the system well, we really have to understand, you know, what's going on behind it. We have to understand why we are grading the way that we're grading. And so we've tried to take some of the comments that we've gotten from some of our jump rope sessions and answer them here. So, proficiency-based grading. Let's see what we've got. All right, so the first question that we are going to answer is just what is it? What is proficiency-based grading? And I found two different definitions. They're very similar, but from two different places. So the first one comes from one of the AOE documents. And so the AOE talks about proficiency-based grading as part of a system of instruction, assessment, and reporting that assesses and reports where students are in relation to specific proficiencies. So you're thinking about your content area standards, as well as transferable skills. We can't forget those. And looking at that over a specific period of time, it might be over a unit or a semester if you're a middle or high school teacher. The second definition that I took was actually from Lamoille South Supervisory Union. They've got an incredible website that is dedicated to all things proficiency-based learning. And so I took their definition, but they talk about that it's a system of identifying where a student is along a continuum of learning, often with a 4-point scale, rather than a percentage scale that has been used traditionally. And I just liked that Lamoille had included that it's a continuum of learning. I think in our traditional sense of grading, it was you know, here's your grade, move on. It wasn't really thought of as this continuous process that happens not just throughout a year, but from year to year. All right, so the second question, this is a big one. So why are we doing this? Why proficiency-based grading? Especially since proficiency-based grading is actually not specifically required by Act 77, which is Act 77 talks about proficiency-based learning. So all those PLPs and flexible pathways and all of that. So if Act 77 is not requiring us to do this, then why would we? And so I guess for me, the easiest way to think about it is that, you know, proficiency-based learning is required. So doing things like using our standards, flexible pathways, multiple opportunities to show mastery, including student voice and choice, and so much more. I think I mentioned PLPs, right? These are all part of Act 77. So if we are changing our teaching practice, which is essentially what proficiency-based learning is, why would we not change our grading practice to align with that? It doesn't really make sense to give students all these opportunities, but then to grade them in a traditional way that's very limiting to them. The AOE put out a document. I'm going to click on this and open this one up. But they put out this document that I would recommend looking over, Vermont Proficiency-Based Grading Practices. And down, starting on the second page, they start going into just why school systems are moving towards this. And so they highlight some of the schools throughout Vermont and why they've chosen to make this shift. And I don't want to go through and read them all, but you can go through and they've got Colchester, Essex, Westford, North Country Union High School. And so they just kind of go through why these schools feel a proficiency-based system is in the best interest of their students. Proficiency-based grading, we may have heard it referred to as standards-based grading, is actually thoroughly researched. I think one of the questions that sometimes comes up is, why are we doing this if Maine has stopped doing this? Maine was not the only school that was taking this. They may have been one of the schools using the language of proficiency based, but standards based, which is really the same thing, is not new, and many states are doing this. And I actually think if you go to the AOE, they may have a map of different states that are doing this. So what does the research say? It says that schools that are participating in a proficiency-based system see increased student motivation. They see increased academic performance from students. They see students acquiring lifelong skills, that we are creating and graduating self-directed learners, which I want to say that there's research out there where they've interviewed multiple companies, and that's something that companies want to see workers coming into the workplace with. They want them to be self-directed. And we see an increase in student ownership of learning. And then some of the better stuff, I like these reasons more, but proficiency-based grading allows our teachers to assess more accurately what a student has learned and what they can do with what they've learned. Teachers can report an accurate current performance level for their students. Teachers, students, and families have a better understanding of what learning gaps exist so that they can address that with targeted instruction. So if we think about our tier 1, tier 2 instruction, right? If we have specific skills that we are assessing, we know what we can target. Whereas if we are looking in a traditional system and a kid has scored a 50 on a test, do we really know specifically what skills we want to target for them? And so what I've done is I have pulled up an example for you. And this is one from my own teaching practice. There are no student names, but this is real data from former students of mine. We use the Bridges math program. And so what Bridges has done, they've done some of the work for us, which is really nice, in that they've created these spreadsheets where they break out each problem, and they've got it coded, so you enter how many points the student got, and according to their algorithm, tell you how the student did on the problem. They also let you know what standards that problem was assessing. So you can see my students here. I've got students 1 through 4, and it calculates the student grade. Let's see if I can get over there. Oops. Hold on. There we go. All right, so it calculates the student grade. So in the traditional sense, student number 1 has scored a 37 out of 48 points, and according to the Bridges algorithm, that student is meeting proficiency or meeting the standard. Student 3 has scored 30. They would be approaching according to the algorithm that Bridges has set forward, and then student 4 would have been approaching. So this is great, but this assessment has given the student many different skills that they're trying to show mastery, right? So how do I know if I can say student 1 had a 37, it looks like they've met, right? It looks pretty good. So what I've done is I broke it out even further. I can see that while this student met, there are some areas of concern that I need to go back and reteach this student. So I can see this standard here. This is numbers and fractions. I have another numbers and fractions over here and over here as well. So I would go back and I would look at that specific language to those standards to see exactly what it is that's being required of the student. And then I can go back and I can target those specific skills so that the student isn't being pushed forward just because they pass an overall assessment. All right. I'm talking a lot, Jenny. So if you have something, please pipe in.
I'm listening intently. You're doing so beautifully. I love how you broke that all down too. And I know like it looks like it was probably a lot of upfront work. But it also looks like it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it also looks like it's that piece where you could just keep going with it for year after year after year. And it's already done for you once you've done it that one time.
Yeah. So, I mean, Bridges did a lot of the work with creating sort of the base, and then I spent the time expanding it, which was a lot of upfront work. But when I think about the hours that I had to put in trying to figure out what question went with what standard, so I could put it in jump rope so I knew how students were doing, it really was probably less work in the long run to rework the whole
doing that. And it really does do what we need it to do, where it pinpoints the exact skills, like you were saying, the exact skill that your student needs some more help with, some more practice with, some, you know, more lessons with, right? And that's what we need to know. Love it, Corey.
So maybe a little plug right here. I know not all of our schools use Bridges, which is totally fine, but this won't be helpful for those schools that don't use Bridges. So for Rutland Town, Proctor Elementary, and West Rutland, I have those spreadsheets created for every single grade level and have taken it to the point where it breaks it down by standard. So if you don't have access to that and you want it, I'll link it in the video. But if you can't find it, reach out to us. I made them for everyone to use. And then maybe for our schools, Wells, Middletown, and Pulteney, who use Math and Focus, and I'm not sure what else, but you know, reach out to us and we're happy to sit down and start looking at assessments and aligning them to standards and building something like this that could help.
Yeah, that'd be great. Math and Focus doesn't make it as easy as Bridges does, but we can still do it.
Yes, we can. We can. So just kind of an overview of how proficiency-based grading works in GRCSU. So because it's not necessarily required by the state, you know, the state gives us some guidelines, but it's like everything else, is really left open to the interpretation of schools and districts. And so I know some schools use like a 5-point scale, but GRCSU uses a 1-point scale. A 1 meaning that you're beginning on the standard, 2 is you're approaching the standard, 3 is you're meeting the standard, and 4 is you are exceeding the standard. And so how do we know where a kid is? So if you look at if you look at that spreadsheet that I gave you, right, it's a whole bunch of numbers. So how do we know if a kid is truly meeting? And so I think that's where some of our PLC work, team time, things like that come into play, and that we need to start creating and utilizing rubrics and learning scales that identify each level of learning. So you need to look at whatever your grade level is, the skill you're assessing, what does it look like if you're meeting, and then work from there. And then I think it's also important to remember that your habits of work are scored on their own and that they don't impact a student's academic score.
I think this might be a good time too to remind people of the work that we've done in the past couple of years, and that you can always go revisit that. And there are modules and things on learning scales and proficiency-based grading and all of those sorts of things. So if you've seen them already, go back, refresh yourself about them. They're there for you to continuously go back to and see, in case you had any additional questions regarding that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's important to know, because there's a lot of learning scales and rubrics that have already been created. So good point. So one of the questions that we've gotten is how does a student get a 4? And what does that 4 mean? You know, if a student can show the skill multiple times, does that mean they get a 4? And so the answer is no. If a student is demonstrating a skill multiple times over and over consistently, they are consistently meeting that expectation. A 4 takes it to the next level, and then 4 shows that they are exceeding the expectation. They're going above and beyond what the standard says, and this can be looked at in a couple of different ways. So the first thing that you can think about is looking at your target skill. What's the next step beyond that? And so I've given an example here for 2nd grade. And the standard that we're looking at is a math standard, telling time. And in 2nd grade, 2nd graders have to know how to tell and write time on a digital and analog clock to the nearest 5 minutes. So I plugged that right here into the 3, which is meeting. If a student can consistently show that they can tell and write time to the nearest 5 minutes, they've met that standard. And then I've gone back from there. A student who is approaching that standard, according to my learning scale, would be able to tell time to the nearest hour and half hour, which is actually a first grade skill. And then a student who is beginning would really be able to do anything that's before that. So that might be telling time to the nearest hour, but not to the nearest half hour. Or it might just be that the student can identify the hour and minute hand. Or perhaps the student can only identify the difference between an analog and a digital clock. So then what does it look like if that second grader is exceeding the expectation? Well, if they can tell time for the nearest 5 minutes, the next step would logically be that they can tell time to the nearest minute. So if I would make sure that I am including problems on an assessment that would give the student a chance to show that they can make this next step. I might give them a couple clocks where they're having to draw hands on the clock or writing down the time, telling time to that nearest minute. Something important to keep in mind, if you are including problems like that on an assessment, so if it's a second grader and you're including telling time to the nearest minute on the assessment, if the student gets that wrong, you can't count that against the student. So that those would have to be above and beyond problems that you would give the student. Another way to exceed the expectation would be really thinking about like Bloom's taxonomy, right? And those higher level thinking skills. And the ones on Bloom's taxonomy would be analysis, evaluation, and creation. So in this instance, I picked a third grader to look at just because telling time to the nearest minute that's it. Third grade, you're supposed to have mastered those time telling skills. And the actual standard for third graders is not just telling time to the nearest minute, but they have to be able to measure time in intervals, so elapsed time, and they have to be able to solve word problems. So in order for a third grade to meet that standard, they have to meet, that's 3 different parts that they have to meet. So what it might look like for a third grader who's approaching it is they might have just a part of that. They might be able to tell and write time to the nearest minute, but they haven't mastered the elapsed time yet. And then I've given them telling time to the nearest 5 minutes, or anything below that would be approaching, or beginning. So if there's no standard beyond telling and writing time to the nearest minute, where do third graders go and how do they show that they've exceeded the expectation? So I'm going to use Bloom's taxonomy, and what I've given them for a standard is that they can now take that knowledge and they can go create a game or an activity for their classmates using those skills of telling and writing time to the nearest minute, measuring time intervals, and creating story problems. And if you think about it, writing a story problem for a third grader, that's a pretty difficult task. So if you've got a kiddo who can write a story problem that involves time, they're clearly showing that they've mastered that concept. All right, let's see what else we have. Ooh, where do I find the proficiencies? So Jenny, you were kind of talking about this a little bit. Do you want to go over?
Yeah. So the GRCSU actually has a shared drive. So when you go into your Google Drive and you click on shared drives, and we also included the link for you so it can just take you right to it. But when you go in, you can see all of the work that all of the groups have done. And there were standards that were done for each of the groups. So like kindergarten, is it K2? I'm trying to see. My eyes don't want to work today. So there's one that, what's that?
I said there's a couple different places because we had the stuff that was done before the merger, and then we have stuff that was done after the merger. So you can find things all over the place.
You can find things all over the place, but there is one folder that I like to go to. That's the Proficiency Task Force. Let's make sure I'm right. And then there are, I think it's the Indicator Continuum, I'm hoping. Yes. Okay. So in here, let's just, let's click on K-2 proficiencies and indicators. And now you have it broke down by ELA and math. And for those of you that are doing jump rope right now, this is the perfect place for you to go because you can see those standards that are highlighted are the ones that you can include in your jump rope. But this is a great place to go and look and see exactly what colleagues have worked on together to decide, as of right now, what standards to be looking at. And So all of those highlighted standards, again, are the ones that are the must-haves, your must-dos, if you will, that are important to make sure that are done. And then the other standards that are not highlighted are absolutely still standards you can work on, but they're not the ones that we're as concerned about as those highlighted ones. Does that make sense?
Yes, well, the essential standards are the highlighted ones. It doesn't mean you don't teach the other ones. It's just
right.
if you're not specifically assessing them, that's okay.
Right, exactly. So that whole entire shared folder contains so much information. You can go dive in and look at all the different things that are in there. But that shared drive is there for you. And again, we have the link, so you can click right on the link. Or if you don't have that link and you want to try to just remember where it is, then it's your Google Drive, shared drives, GRCSU proficiencies and indicators, shared drive. Was there something else Am I missing anything?
I think that's good. I think just explore that folder. There's like so much stuff in there. It's overwhelming. So like go in, dig around, and find what works for you. I think is the best way to.
Yeah. And if you have any questions, reach out to us, or if you have any suggestions, thoughts, ideas, things that you think might be helpful to include, then let us know and we can keep working on that.
Yeah. You can find your proficiencies right in jump rope. I know that one of the questions that we've had, especially from that like 3 to 6 or 3 to 5 grade band, is it doesn't look like our proficiencies or our indicators are in there. When the state put out the proficiencies, they put out, and actually we can just go to it because that's our next one. Is that the AOE has this stuff on their website. You have to scroll down a little bit, and it's actually referred to as the PBGRs, the Proficiency Based Grading Requirements. I'm just going to come to ELA, and we do have this in our drive as well, so that's another place that you can find this. But it looks like this. It's a table where they've given you the overall proficiency. So if you look at reading, then they break it down by the elementary goes through 5th grade. So by the end of 5th grade, this is what kiddos need to be able to do. And if you compare this to the Common Core, this is 5th grade language. This is what's in jump rope for some of our standards. So what you need to do is, this is where those grading scales come into play, is you need to know, okay, so quoting accurately from a text, what does that mean at my grade level? It's just kind of where the system is right now. You can go to the Common Core website. You're going to find your ELA and your math standards. So, there's so many terms, right? Proficiencies, indicators, standards, target skills, like what does it all mean, right? So our proficiencies are our overarching themes, right? So in ELA, our proficiencies are reading, writing again, which is a research project, speaking and listening, another speaking and listening that they have little descriptions to distinguish between the two of them, and then language. So those are our proficiencies. They're big overarching umbrella of a theme. Then you have your indicators, which is what kids need to know by the time they leave. And then you have your standards, which is grade specific. And then when you talk about like having your target skills or things like that, it's just kid-friendly language. So it's like the I can statements. So a lot of terminology. You can go to the NGSS for your science standards, and you can go to the C3 for your social studies or global citizenship standards. So those are all really great documents to check out. And then finally, last bit is, like, if you're really itching for more, because I'm sure you all are, at this point in the school year, right? But if you want to learn more about proficiency-based grading, there is actually a ton of stuff out there. And there are a lot of schools that have done a lot of this work for us. And we need to do what teachers do best, which is beg, borrow, and steal, right? But take a look. The AOE, while somewhat difficult to navigate on occasion, they do have some good documents. So we've pulled out some really good ones. There's the Vermont Proficiency Based Grading Practices, which I had brought up earlier. There's a longer report about it that has some interesting information. You have the excuse me. You have the proficiency-based grading and transcripts. It's a question and answer document. And so I know we've had questions which we're not going to address today, but like, what about families? What does this mean for students graduating? What does this mean for colleges and transcripts? This document begins to answer some of those questions. I had mentioned Lamoille South Supervisory Union, an entire website dedicated to this, along with examples. Check them out; they're really good. Just the AOE's general proficiency-based learning resources site, it's full of stuff. It's overwhelming, but there's good stuff in there. The Grade Schools Partnership has research supporting proficiency-based learning, grading, and reporting. It's always worth checking them out. Al shared with us this document right here, which was Meeting versus Exceeding Expectations, Teaching Students the Difference. We highly recommend that one. It's a really good read. And then I had just found this document. I think it's old. I don't know where it came from, but I think it's a good document. And that it really highlights the difference, right, between a traditional grading system and a proficiency-based grading system. And what were we doing and what are we moving towards? And I think it really highlights the difference and through the difference, the impact that it has, not only on our students, but on us and our teaching. So that
is a lot.
That is proficiency-based grading in a nutshell. And you know, it's funny because as I was like starting to prepare this for today and talking to you and Al for, you know, information and stuff, I was like, oh my God, we're never going to have enough to get through half an hour.
No, and look, we have 3 minutes left.
There's so much to proficiency-based grading.
There's so much, and it's so good. And once you get like that understanding, it really isn't as overwhelming as it seems at first. But that document that Al shared, that article, I think that's the one where it does a really nice job of explaining. Yes, that's it. Really explaining like why we're doing this, why we want to do it, what we're thinking of. And Corey, you mentioned at the beginning, you said that there were studies. There's actually been a few different studies, and you can Google search them. And they have said like when our students get out into the real world, what are the things that they're missing? What do they really need to be doing? And that article sort of ties that right back in again and says that only 15% of people that lose their job is because of actual like not understanding their job or doing their job. It's more of the social skills, the deeper thinking, those sorts of things that we really need to shift our practices with and get kids to practice them now, even pre-K, right? So it's a good thing. It is.
You know, it's funny because as I was doing this and talking about like going out into the real world and what skills do workplace environments want, man, I was even thinking just about our job. I mean, if your coaches were not self-directed, and even our teachers, I mean, yes. It's such a self-directed profession. You can't sit around waiting for people to tell you what to do next. You know, that you kind of have to go out and do it, and it's messy. But growth mindset and all of that, I mean, this is where it comes into play.
It is. It is. I was going to end with showing everybody my little friend that's on my window, but she flew away.
Oh.
So I have a robin on my windowsill in my office in Wells, and it is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It is attached to the window. It's so awesome. We have a live webcam going on the Wells Village School Facebook page so far until I can get my hands on YouTube, but it's pretty cool. I get distracted.
All right.
So
we have
if you guys have any questions, make sure you reach out to us. And we just want to, it was in the coaches newsletter, but just want to throw it out there as a reminder that we are off for the next 2 Wednesdays. And we will return in 3 Wednesdays from now. And I would love to tell you what we were talking about, but I can't remember.
It might be an overview of in-service.
I think it is.
Might be our next one, is an overview of in-service.
That sounds right. So we will see you in 3 weeks. And until then, enjoy the beautiful sunshine, the warm weather, and drink lots of water. Bye, everyone.
Bye.